you asked, so we answered. We've been getting a lot of really good feedback with the last video that you did, Brad, and
Cool.
people are asking for more information on all aspects of addiction, growth, the family dynamic, and so I wanted to go ahead and spend some time to have you sit down and go over this information and what we can do to get it out there.
Sure. Okay. Hey guys. So I think this morning we'll talk about what we just talked about in one of my process groups, the whole issue of relapsing from a client standpoint as well as from a parent standpoint. How do we make sense of the relapse, and how do we kind of get to the bottom of kind of what's really going on here? So as we talk about relapse, an understanding that we got in our group was that our relapse is kind of the last thing that happens. It's not the first thing. It's like we think, oh, this person, there you go, they just relapsed again. Well, there's actually a whole bunch of miles of territory that was covered before the relapse actually happened. And that's kind of what we want to bring to the surface this morning to talk about. Because what we're finding is that the relapse it's kind of already happening before it happens, and it's happening to do a certain thing in many cases. And that thing is to cover pain. What's happening is we have a lot of clients that are acting out in different ways before the relapse actually happens. They're not going to meetings, or they're not calling a sponsor, they're not connecting with their peers, they're not connecting with staff. And why is it happening? And then all of a sudden, by the way, that person's gone, they just picked up something and they're on the street. What usually happens is they haven't gone to the real core issues. And that's the problem, is underneath addiction are three basic things. You have hurts, hates, and secrets. If they're not dealing with the hurts or the hates, the resentments, or the secrets, then the relapse is going to happen, because relapse is I'm going to use a substance so I don't have to feel what I have to feel. So here's the thing. Either we deal with the pain or we avoid the pain. It's kind of that simple.
So it sounds like there's a behavioral prelapse before the pharmacological relapse, if you will.
Right,
Okay.
exactly. So you hear some clients talking about, in their mind, they're compromising already. Well, how about if I go see these friends over here? Yeah, they use a little bit, no big deal. Or just various different behavioral things that are not kind of what you'd say a good program. And what we're getting to understand is clients that come to therapy but not to do therapy, or clients that come to therapy and have nothing to say, are still in that mode of I can't touch my pain. And so this is the basic formula that I use for that is it's really simple. It's uncover, discover, recover. I can't uncover my pain unless I talk to someone. And then in the process of uncovering my pain, taking the lid off the box, then I can start to discover where this actually comes from. And a lot of this has to tie into early wounds in childhood. In fact, most of it does, usually between 0 to 15. And then my resentments. Who are those people that hurt me? And I can't let go of that. I can't forgive them. They did this to me or that to me. And it's still deep inside of me. And I can't get to it. I can't release it. Once we get to the uncover and then we get to the discover, now we can start to actually recover.
Okay, and so a lot of this information has been going into our support group community. So a lot of it is spouses, brothers, sisters, parents.
Right.
What are some things that they would be able to do to help with this process? Because relapse is a real sensitive issue.
Right.
Some people we've spoken with have this mindset of once they finish treatment, they should be perfected. There's no more issues.
Exactly.
The disease is gone. And so of how to, first of all, maybe approach. A lot of people will approach after the relapse. What are some tools that we can help educate to engage when the prelapse is forming? And then also what barriers that we see here when that prelapse comes up because it hasn't physically manifested yet, usually the resistance.
Right. Okay, so I think the first thing to understand is we need a more realistic view of what happens in rehab. There is no magic wand. Just going to rehab, showing up at the door and spending 30 days If that's all that happens and then they leave, there's been no real change. Just doing the 12 steps. If they just did 12 steps, well, then they're better, right? Then everything's fine. They're fixed. They're cured. No, it all has to do with what have they done to open that box on the inside, to take out that stuff that they're carrying. I can guarantee you that 90% at least of the clients in my group today, as well as clients I always have a very high level of pain in their life that they have not been able to address. Usually that happened in childhood when they had no control, and they developed certain ways of dealing with that, of shutting down and avoiding, and they're doing the same thing today.
Yeah, so it was, while you were sharing that, something popped in my mind. I think it was Buddha said, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional.
Right.
So the thought process is a lot of the times when we need to uncover, we see a temporary spike in pain, and as we work through it, it starts to degrade, and then our quality of life gets much better. Because that momentary and temporary spike in pain, most people will just continue to experience this pain and relive the future pain over and over and over again. And that's one of the things that we tend to see here is, how do we create a safe place for that person to say, I'm gonna go ahead and take a little bit of additional pain temporarily to work through this, so I don't have to continue to live this low quality of life where the suffering is just continual.
Well, okay, so that's really the key right there. And the key is, so the flip of this is, why do go to rehab? Because rehab has the fellowship. Rehab has the group. Rehab has the whole assortment of staff that surrounds a client in the process of uncovering and discovering and starting to recover their pain. If I were to have to go back to my pain by myself again, I wouldn't want to do it. I can't blame anyone. But that's not what we're dealing with here. Now we actually have support. We have people that care. We have staff that care. We have their peers that care because they've walked the road of pain. And so if you put all that together, that's the optimum environment of opening that box, taking out those painful parts, looking at them, maybe crying over them, processing them, and then getting back some health.
Yeah, it's interesting because they say addiction is isolation. So when we can get in a healthy environment with a community, it's the antithesis to addiction, and then we can actually start that process of growing. So are there any 2 or 3 maybe takeaways that a loved one can do to help support their loved one, let's say post-rehab? Because we do see some people that will go out, reintegrate into the world, do well for a while, haven't necessarily really worked through everything, and it pops up and there's a relapse somewhere along the line. I know that causes a lot of frustration for
Right.
both sides. So I'm wondering if there's maybe 2 or 3 steps or little strategies that the family can use to really help support.
Sure, absolutely. Well, the first one is, let's get rid of the myth that just going and spending time in rehab is going to fix it. So when you call your loved one that is in treatment, the question is not to ask how long are you going to be there. The question is, what are you doing in rehab? How are you dealing with your issues, the stuff that you grew up with that's still hurtful for you? How are you dealing with that? Are you talking with your therapist? Are you talking with your process group? Are you connecting with a sponsor? Because a sponsor, he's someone that does not get paid. He does this for free. So this is a gift that is given to each and every client that wants it, someone that they can talk to every single day for free. So that's the question. Who are you really connecting with? From the therapist side, from your sponsor side, from your network side, your fellowship. And then secondly, for the family to be, to have a listening ear without judgment and criticism. Allow them to talk. So what happened with you this week? What insights are you getting there this week in treatment? What are you pinpointing that really is making sense to you? And let's leave the criticism and judgment and all the past crimes behind the conversation, so we can prevent a safe environment to have a talk.
Yeah, I like that. And actually, 2 things popped in my mind while you were sharing that. So once the loved one is back home, a big thing is observing, free of judgment. or evaluation.
Right.
Because a lot of the times we attach that judgment to the observation, especially when we're sharing it with someone. You shouldn't, you should. So the thought process is, how do I observe free of judgment? And one of the ways that we're able to do that is by identifying what our feelings are in that observation.
Right.
And so how either I'm affected or what my concerns are or my worry, call that primary emotions. How do we stay below to hit those primary emotions so we can share, because it's so easy to jump above of, I knew you'd do it again, or whatever that looks
Exactly.
like. So I like that observation free of judgment. And then also one of the things that I know you're really good at exposing, if you will, is not just the surface area, but how deep is an individual going. And that really is the key. It reminds me of the old story of the bamboo growth, where my numbers are going to be off, but from what I've heard, when you first plant a seed of bamboo, for the first 1 to 2 years, there's no growth above ground. The reason why is because it is literally spending years of just doing this huge foundation of roots. And then at year 2 or 3, I think within 1 year, it sprouts over 60 feet. And so it looks like this thing is just, taking Miracle Grow and shooting up. And our process is really similar. If we try to shoot up too quick with no root system, as soon as the wind hits, any storm of life, and not even a storm, just maybe a big gust, we tend to fall over. But so really looking at the depth, the width and the depth of all that work underground, of the discovering, uncovering and recovering. So once we do start that growth process, we have that strong foundation, and that's all environment and community.
Right, that's very true. So in a way, we kind of do root surgery here.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we're doing the emotional surgery.
Right. It's like what shows on the tree are just the symptoms. The dishonesty, the selfishness, the behavior that is maybe antisocial. That's just the fruit of the root. And so our job is to get down to the root to uncover that. So what happened here, right? And then start treating the root. So that's kind of what we do.
No, I like that. So the 2 takeaways that I got from it is, first, that awareness level of being aware, getting more educated on this whole process. And then the other part is, once we see the observations of the behavioral prelapse, of sharing that in a way that's not necessarily in a negative confrontational way, but more of sharing from observation, so we can really lean on that community and that environment for support.
Right. And the very last thing I'll put out here is for the client to be able to start asking the right questions of themselves. Because we're very limited in what we can do here. We can provide the environment, but the real growth comes from the client. So the client has to ask their own questions to explore what is going on with their root system. And so I encourage every client to journal. And if you're a parent out there and you're talking with your family member, ask them if they're doing that. Are you doing some journaling to explore you to get down to what you need to get down to?
And so what are some questions, because I love that, what are some questions or examples of questions that you can think of that will help kind of bring some of that stuff to the forefront?
Sure. So questions like, why do I keep lying to myself? Why do I keep doing things that are harmful to myself? What pain am I unwilling to share? What resentments am I unwilling to let go of? There's like a whole list of questions, but they're all based at a core of really, where's my heart at? What happened to my heart? Where's it at today? Where do I need to go?
Yeah, it's that daily circumcision of the heart, of making sure I'm in alignment with my actions. And so one final thing is, as we are asking those questions, is to create and protect space. It's not just a question, answer quick, but to create space, to protect that time and say, this is the me time for today, whether it's 5, 10, 15 minutes, but to sit down and to actually allow some time of contemplation to start working through that.
Absolutely, that is so important. That's called solitude. So solitude is time that I discipline myself to protect from my relationship with me and my relationship with my higher power. Very important. If you don't have that quiet time, that means that you're still avoiding pain. You're trying to just create noise so that you don't get to ask yourself the right questions.
Yeah, and so I'll leave with this. I know for journaling and therapy, I tell people I'm so messed up, I started therapy at 6. That's how jacked up I am. But for years, if not decades, therapist after therapist said to journal, and no one told me why. And so in the back of my mind, I thought I was terminally unique. Is
Right.
the statement I love hearing. Until finally one person said, "Do you know why we suggest this?" I said, "No." And they explained it. They basically said your unconscious is running basically all your habitual patterns, your day-to-day stuff, all the pain that's in there is kind of governed by your unconscious. If you don't provide the space, and by writing, because I thought, okay, I'll type. They said, no, hand write. Here's the reason why. It slows down your process. You can only write so fast that the unconscious starts throwing little issues up.
Yeah.
Slowly but surely. And when you allow that space and you slow down your brain, it forces the brain to slow down, starts to uncover some of the painful stuff, to be honest.
Yeah.
And that is when we can actually start to work on and internalize that change.
I totally agree with that. I think that's the first gift to yourself.
Yeah.
Is solitude.
Well, thank you so much for taking time to go over this. I know I'll be completely transparent. I do this selfishly because I learn something every time I'm able to talk with someone and kind of relook at, okay, what is my day like? What am I doing? Am I using this? So I get a ton out of these things. So thank you.
Good, absolutely.
You got
Hope
it.
it's helpful.